So, we...
Hi!
Welcome to the Barn Theatre in Cirencester. I'm here with Dom.
Dominic
or Anik?
Innick.
Dominic.
Brewer.
Dominic Brewer. And we've got a crowd of people here too in the background.
No, we don't.
I'm going to stop that because it's annoying.
Yeah.
There we go. We can do all that in post.
Yeah.
So, we have a challenge, Dominic.
We do.
We are setting out to find out whether people still actually want to see Shakespeare in our theatres, whether they want to actually read and learn about Shakespeare and his works in schools, and if there's still an appetite after 400 years since his death for the Bard.
Yeah. Are people still interested in Shakespeare? Does Shakespeare still have things to say to us in the 21st century and the problems we're facing right now? How relevant is Shakespeare to the world?
I kind of want to start from the point of view that I am not a Shakespeare expert. I think that you are way more qualified to talk about him than me.
No. Anyone is qualified to talk about him. I wouldn't. No, even a foolish person would claim expertship unless they're, PhD'd and all the rest. But you're into Shakespeare. You may not think that you know the facts and figures and all the deets, but yeah.
It is quite funny though how I think Shakespeare as a topic, a lot of people do feel like, oh, I'm not an expert. I'm actually a little bit afraid of Shakespeare.
Yeah, because it's overwhelming that there's more scholarship about Shakespeare than any other topic. There's libraries full of books on every tiny aspect. It's been mined for interesting stuff for literally hundreds of years.
And they're still finding new interesting bits.
Well, there's a big call for it. So there's always people trying to find new takes. Every single, Shakespeare scholar is trying to produce a new thesis, a new idea, a new piece of something, a tiny fragment of something to do with Shakespeare. So,
before we get into the depth of it, we're here because you worked at the Barn Theatre not so long ago. Tell me a little bit about your time here and what you did at the Barn Theatre.
Right, okay. So, I was here at the end of last year. I was in The Hound of the Baskervilles, the comedy three-hand adaptation, and that was a very happy experience. I had a good time working here, got on very well with everyone, including my good friend Ewan Lewis, artistic director of the Barn Theatre.
That's me.
And Joe O'Malley, who directed the play. You put out a call asking for people who knew something about Shakespeare or interested in Shakespeare or wanted to talk about Shakespeare. And
you answered the call.
I did answer the call. I'm lucky in my nearly 20-year career now. I've
come back close to the mic. Sorry.
Come back close to the mic. Yeah. In my nearly 20 years of acting, I've got to do a fair bit of Shakespeare. Maybe not as much as I'd want to. I love doing Shakespeare. It's been something I've been into since I was a teenager. It ticked the box for me when I was younger in terms of theatricality and drama. And it ticked the box for me on the more academic side too. I was a very happy English student and I loved doing English and drama at school, which I carried on into university. I did English and drama at university too. So Shakespeare was a big element for me from the get-go. And I did Shakespeare at school, which most people do, studying and performing. And then, when I got started, I did several productions. And that led me to some pretty big productions. I was very lucky. I got to spend time working for Shakespeare's Globe, and that meant I was working on 2 productions that were in the West End and then transferred to Broadway, where they won some Tony Awards. So pretty big.
Incredible, really.
Pretty big fish.
So that's sort of at the top level of the game in the Shakespeare world, which is amazing to be... and I feel privileged that you came down to the Little Barn Theatre in Cirencester to do work here
Yeah,
when you
no,
when
I
you
mean,
come from
yeah,
the
I
heights
mean,
of that?
work is work, and
But-
it depends what you're into, and I love all sorts. I love doing musicals, I love doing Shakespeare, I love doing comedy. It doesn't matter, it's acting. So, the Shakespeare experience for me has been amazing, and it's taken me to some extraordinary places around the world. Obviously in America, and I did a whole year touring the world doing A Midsummer Night's Dream. I was in China and Israel and Malta and all over the place. So,
So do you think, knowing that you've toured these productions all across the world,
Mhm.
I would presume that you believe that there is a thirst for Shakespeare across the globe?
There's definitely a thirst for Shakespeare. If there wasn't, these things would not happen, and they wouldn't be as successful or as profitable as they are. Certainly, outside of Britain, there's a fervour for it, because our culture is very, very admired around the world, whether that's across the Atlantic in America, or it's in the Middle East, or wherever. The Chinese absolutely love Shakespeare. They're mad for it, which is fascinating to me, because actually you find that in a peculiar contradiction, Chinese students may be more passionate across the board about Shakespeare than British students are.
Don't you think that's interesting? The reason that we're having these conversations is that the Barn Theatre is putting on a production of Henry V.
Yep.
I didn't see Henry's 1, 2, 3, 4, but the fifth one
The fifth one's quite good.
is quite good, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
Rocky 4.
Is Rocky IV the good one?
Rocky 4 is the one where
Ivan Drago.
Ivan Drago, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And then the Rocky 5 was awful. So
Yeah. I mean,
maybe we should have done Rocky.
or Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Is that a good one? Dream Child, I think it's 5.
See,
yeah.
I'm petrified of scary movies, so I will refuse to ever watch a scary movie.
Okay.
Since the Blair Witch Project back in the day.
That's a shame. You're missing out on some really good movies.
I can't help my feelings.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
My mind goes to a dangerous place.
They scar you.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
I can't sleep for days.
That's fair.
Blair Witch Project still petrifies me.
Did you see it in the cinema?
No, I watched it from behind the sofa at my sister's birthday party.
I mean, this is a tangent, I know, but I did see it in the cinema, and it's funny. Well, I'm glad you had that response to it, because people do see it and they're like, "Oh, it didn't do anything to me." And I was like, "Where did you watch it? At home?" I'm like, "Well, there you go." When you're in the cinema, you're trapped. You're like, "Oh God, night's falling. Oh my God." Pretty intense.
Well, that's a bit like watching stuff in the theatre.
It's a bit like watching some Shakespeare for some people.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking, yeah, they're scared of it.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is that from that slight tangent, do you believe that Shakespeare should be watched and listened to rather than read?
Yeah, I mean, by a preference, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he certainly never intended his plays to be studied or read. They are studied and read because they're works of literature, and they're great works of literature, in my opinion. But he only wrote them to be performed. He never wrote them down specifically. They were only constructed and put together as plays to be read long after he was dead. So that was never even his intention. I think if there was ever a choice, you'd want to take people to see Shakespeare being performed well, and they would get something out of it. The thing you're not going to do well is to put a bunch of students down in front of the text and say, read that and understand it somehow. I mean, I think this applies across the board in both cases. If you're taught not very well, you're not going to get anything out of Shakespeare.
So
yeah, so in both cases, you can be taught Shakespeare badly, and it will turn you off Shakespeare for life, which you see an awful lot of. You can also see a bad production of Shakespeare, and it can put you off Shakespeare for life. If it's not well produced or particularly well acted, you might go, well, what's the fuss? I don't get it. I don't get anything out of this. On the flip side, if you see an amazing production of a Shakespeare play, any Shakespeare play done amazingly, it can change your whole perspective. And if you're taught it brilliantly, it will change your whole perspective. I was taught Shakespeare brilliantly, and it blew my mind open. And then seeing great Shakespeares, and I hunt out great Shakespeares now, and I'll go and see most Shakespeare productions of a certain level. But because it's a passion. It's something I'm into.
That's really interesting because I feel exactly the same. I remember vividly the first Shakespeare that I ever saw, and it was A Midsummer Night's Dream at the RSC, probably in 2003 or 2004. Can't quite remember when. But since that point, it was really close to the time that I sort of went, okay, I want a career in the arts. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think seeing that was so inspiring. I didn't understand all the language. But I did watch this thrilling piece of work and go, wow, this is mind-blowing. And the brilliance of it is that actually, if it's done well, you don't need to understand every little...
No, of course you don't. It is complicated language. It's heightened verse. It's poetry. So you're not necessarily going to understand every single aspect on the first listen, but God, it's going to sit in your ear. You're going to go, wow, that's something.
And I love the sort of the skill set that came with it, that people think that it should be studied and meticulously well placed in every vowel and consonant, all the iambic pentameter. And I think this company in particular sort of went against all the rules, and they had lots of singing, lots of movement, lots of puppetry, and that was the exciting bit. And we still had these amazing stories.
I think the playfulness of it is always something that works with Shakespeare. It doesn't, for me, and it never feels stodgy. It shouldn't feel stodgy. They're exciting plays. They should be exciting plays anyway. They're about exciting things, which is why it's always a little bit. Well, it's disappointing if nothing else when people sort of say, "Don't get it, boring." Don't understand, don't want to understand. You have to sort of blame the people producing when that happens.
So that's interesting. So let's come to you specifically. You talked about the production that you did on in the West End and then on Broadway. What was that? It
was 2 plays. It was Twelfth Night and it was Richard III. So 2 plays in rep.
And so tell me about the production, a little bit about that production.
Well, they were quite unusual in the respect that they were coming out of all the many years, probably a decade's worth of research that Mark Rylance was doing as artistic director of Shakespeare's Globe, where they were exploring what it would have been like to see Shakespeare performed when Shakespeare was writing. So it's what they coined original practice productions, where it's authentic costume, authentic music, played on authentic instruments. It's the verse spoken properly. It's all male, which isn't very in vogue, obviously, but
that was the case at the time.
Yeah, exactly. The plays were written specifically for men and for boy actors playing the female roles. That's the way it was. It was against the law for women to appear on stage in Elizabethan and Jacobean times. So it was recreating that feel. So in terms of Shakespeare, certainly in the last 40 years or so, which has become conceptual Shakespeare, director Shakespeare, well, they'll add an extra element on top. It's this play set during the British Raj, it's this play set in the First World War, it's this play set, I don't know, whatever, set in space. There's been a lot of that, and some people were getting a little bit tired of that because it was actually sometimes it was smothering the play, and the play wasn't coming through. It was just a trick. This might have felt a bit like a gimmick, but in a funny way, it was like going back to the basics, going back to the roots. In fact, to see what you get out of it when it's done authentically, as authentically as you can. And there was no. The other thing about Shakespeare's Globe is it's a shared light experience, which is quite different to your standard theatre experience.
And what does that mean?
Well, it means that the audience aren't sat in the dark and the cast are all on stage in the light, and it's like you're in the cinema, or there's a divide, us and them. A shared light experience is where everyone's in the same light, literally. So at the Globe, you would go during the day, obviously back then, because they didn't have electric lights. So during the afternoon, you'd be on stage and you'd be in the same light as the people in the audience. So everyone's lit. Everyone can see everyone else.
So they become an additional character.
They become part of the whole experience completely. And they will interact with each other, and it's got a much more focused energy and a buzz about it. And Yeah, that was something that they aimed for. Obviously, these productions started at the Globe, and then they took them to the West End and to America. But they tried to maintain that. The house lights were never taken to darkness. There was candlelight was the main source of light. It was supplemented by electric light because you'd be looking through the gloom a bit to try and see what was going on, which you didn't want. But it did mean, particularly in a modern era and modern theatre practice where you're on stage in the West End, there was a classic example one night when there was a power cut in the West End on Shaftesbury Avenue, and all the lights all along Shaftesbury Avenue were out, and every single show stopped, including it was the opening night of Viva Forever, the Spice Girls musical. I remember that. So
no one else does.
No. Yeah. So they had to wait for the power to be put back on. We were the only show on Shaftesbury Avenue that didn't stop because we were being lit by candles, and the extra little boost from the electric lights went off, and we were like, "Oh, what's happened there?" But no one really noticed because it was still lit, and so we just carried on, which was quite extraordinary to be able to do that.
That sounds amazing.
It was quite amazing, yeah.
I've just been very recently to see Faustus at the Globe in the Wanamaker, and it was incredible to it was all candlelit.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any additional light apart from candles.
No, you're probably right. There's some out there. There's some in the back corridors where you come in, and then they close the curtains and close the windows, and it blacks it out. But yeah, when it's dark in there, it's fantastic. I mean,
such an amazing atmosphere.
Yeah.
Shame about the seats being the most uncomfortable seats I've ever sat in my life.
It's a funny thing about the Wanamaker. I've been really again after I worked on those productions. I got to do a bunch of research workshops in there, maybe 5 or 6 of them, all about different aspects of Shakespeare scholarship and exploring different aspects, including music and scenes that are meant to be set outside during the plays, but you're indoors, so how does that work? And, different lighting elements and all that kind of thing. What was my point? What were we going to say?
That's the thing about the Wanamaker.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable seats.
Oh, that's right. When they designed it, it was based on a drawing they'd found of an authentic Jacobean indoor playhouse. Whether that was accurate or whether it was kind of remembered is hard to say, because obviously when you're in what would be the stalls or the pit, all the seats are in a big curve and they all face each other. They're not facing the stage. And they took it quite literally, and so you're basically not. You have to turn and what's up there? And yeah, if you're up in the gods, it's awful.
Yeah. And I think if you got your back to the wall, you're laughing. It's great.
Sure. The seats on stage are fantastic. The ones that are just to the edge and off. What you get from there is amazing. Yeah, I mean it's got some problems, but it's an amazing space, not only to be in but to act in. I mean the vocal quality in there is magnificent. It takes what I've heard it said a couple of times. It takes a whisper and a scream.
That's a good for any space.
Yeah.
So those are in total contrast to what the Barn Theatre is trying to achieve with this production of Henry V.
So those were quite specific and quite unusual, even within the Globe's own current remit. But what you, not to speak on your behalf, but what the Barn seems to be doing is responding very specifically to something that's happening right now. And that's the reason to put this play on, as you'll probably now explain.
Well, I think the interesting thing is what we're hearing at the moment is if you went to anyone in Cirencester town or in London town and asked them, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to watch Line of Duty on BBC or watch a Shakespeare? I would bet, or Game of Thrones versus Shakespeare, I would bet most people would say, I'd just rather chill in front of the TV and watch Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And although I'm probably in that camp, am I peeking a little bit there? Yeah. I'm probably in that camp of I'd probably, out of choice, watch a brilliant TV series.
Yeah.
Rather than going and spending time in the theatre watching a Shakespeare. Yeah. Shakespeare isn't my calling. I am, as I've said, I'm a huge fan, but it does sometimes feel like hard work.
Yeah.
But I also am of the belief that I need to be educated. I'm also of the belief that this is our greatest ever playwright. There will never be another William Shakespeare. And it is our duty, it's my duty as an artistic director, it's our duty as a theatre to bring these plays to life for the audiences of now.
Yeah. And I don't disagree with you. I mean, there are times when certainly, if you ask me on a certain day, would you rather sit in and watch Game of Thrones, or would you rather go to the theatre and watch a Shakespeare play? Like, well, I'm going to sit and watch Game of Thrones. I mean, just because I love Shakespeare doesn't mean I'm 24/7 passionate about it. I think there's room for both. You can be deeply passionate and deeply love sitting down and binging a box set, but Shakespeare was the original box set.
Yeah, for sure. As we've seen with these serial histories.
Exactly. The Hollow Crown series is an original free long form box set. You know, the history cycle, of which Henry V sits smack in the middle, is exactly that. It's an Elizabethan Game of Thrones.
So here comes the question: how do we get more people appreciating and it's quite easy when you're the Royal Shakespeare Company or the Globe, that are these massive organisations with a little barn theatre in Cirencester, and we want to do some of this exciting work that we, from what I'm seeing in the rehearsal room of Henry V, it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah,
and if it could be a new play, it could be an absolutely new play written about now.
That's what it should be. Bearing in mind that it was history to Shakespeare too. I mean, we tag them as the history plays, but he wasn't writing. He was referencing stuff that was happening in his era. In all of the plays, I think they were all about things that were happening at that moment. But he was writing them for good reason, and it had to be popular because it had to be to draw the audience in. If he wrote something that nobody's interested in, it wouldn't have made any money, and the theatre business that he ran would have collapsed. The sheer fact that he was a genius writer meant that he had great patronage. He was royally, approved, which is a big help to anybody. The Royal Shakespeare Company, for example. I think that the important thing is why put the play on. What's the relevance? What are you trying to say about the play to now? And I think that's very much why you and Hal are doing Henry V. It's very important what's happening right now, and all the things we've been talking about in terms of nationalism, national culture, national identity, are all things that are referenced. Leadership is a massive issue in Henry V. Putting away the past, looking to the future, these are all things that are important to us. And I think the decision to do that play now, with what's going on in our nation, is really, really exciting and important. And I think it says a lot about where we are, which I think is one of the amazing things about Shakespeare, that he can speak across generations. Things he had no idea. Human nature doesn't change. It's proven again and again in the plays.
I wonder if he knew that.
I think he did. I think
whether he'd sort of sussed it at the time, and he knew that 400 years after his death, we'd still be producing his work and be making a podcast about him.
I doubt that very much.
I don't think he knew about podcasts.
No,
he may. Did he know that he was a genius?
I don't know. Who knows? I mean, nobody else was doing what he was doing at the time. He was standing on the backs of other great writers, but he did stand alone. There are other good writers of the era, but they don't touch him really. There are good plays and good playwrights, but he's unique in what he achieves in the plays.
So let's get down to business. Let's get down to the nitty gritty.
Brass tacks.
We are here, and we're going to spend the next couple of weeks exploring a few different angles with a real core question. Is Shakespeare still relevant in today's day and age?
Yeah.
We've just seen on Good Morning Britain it being debated by an English scholar, and Adrian Childs. And I found it quite shocking that even the thought that Shakespeare should be taken out of schools. And I believe that other authors, I can't remember who the author was, were saying that it's not relevant and they shouldn't be teaching, force feeding students Shakespeare.
I guess the argument is he's dominated for forever, and we are force fed it, rightly or wrongly, and maybe not very well, and that has an impact on how we perceive Shakespeare. So there's strong arguments now in the era we're living in about, do we need to be fed more stuff by dead white men? There are other writers out there that we should be looking at. Yeah, I mean,
but aren't we getting his work force fed because he is the best?
Well, that's the argument, and that's what I would argue. Yeah, certainly. It would be a brave person who would stand up and say, no, this playwright's better.
Mm-hmm.
You might argue that this playwright can, I don't know. I think given the gamut of what happens in the 37 plays, it covers all bases for me. Everything that you could want to see on stage or want to feel emotionally is there. So, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
So, I'm going to guess that there's going to be a huge divide. And we're going to go out there, speak to a load of people, speak to people who are in our circles in the theatre world, who I will presume will all back the fact that Shakespeare is very, very important.
Well, I'd love to get under the skin a little bit and get beyond people's instant reaction.
Yeah, because I think as soon as there's a camera in their face, they're going to go, oh, yeah, I love Shakespeare, I love all of that, it's so good. Yeah. Because they think that's what we want them to say.
Right.
I wonder how many of them go and watch, or maybe we'll say, okay, I've got a Sunday afternoon free. I'm going to chuck on Branner's Henry V, or we're going to watch some of the old DVDs of Sir Patrick.
I wonder how often people go back and rewatch things anyway these days. There's so much stuff to absorb. So
much new stuff.
Yeah. How often do you ever go back and rewatch things that you might have liked or might have not understood before? Or it's a question, isn't it?
Or sit down and just pick up the play text and just have a read.
No, it's really not going to happen.
No. Well, Adrian Childs says if it wasn't force-fed in schools that he doesn't think anyone would actually read the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Yeah, I imagine that's probably right, particularly in an era when books in general are sort of fading from popularity for young people.
Do you read a lot?
I do, yeah. Probably not as much as I used to. Because I'm now distracted by lots of other things. I'm connected to the internet half my life, and it's all right there. And so I don't do half as much reading as I used to. I used to read on commutes, on travel, and I don't do that anymore. I just look at my phone.
It's really interesting because I think I read a lot, but I don't read books.
Yeah,
I don't. I read my phone.
Yeah,
I don't even read my Kindle.
But you don't read books. You just read content.
Yeah.
I
consume so much content. Usually BBC Sport or the news.
Yeah.
But yeah, even as an artistic director, it almost feels like work to sit down and read. I like to go and see things.
Yeah.
I'm not a very sit down and study guy anyway. I never have been.
If I do any reading now, it's usually last thing at night.
So do you think that goes hand in hand with the culture that perhaps the reason why Shakespeare maybe isn't as respected? That's a controversial phrase, but I would say that maybe that is hand in hand with the fact that people don't sit down and read as much anymore.
If people don't read very much anymore ever, then they're not going to pick up complicated.
No, they're going to what? They're going to read 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, or people,
Girl on the Train.
People devoured and went mad for the Harry Potter books.
They're very good.
Yeah.
I read all of those.
Right.
I actually queued up at midnight
Did you?
to get the last but one.
I was a bit too old. I was beyond that phase. So when the fuss all hit and everyone was talking about it, I think I read the first 3 pretty quick, and they were easy, quick reads, and I enjoyed reading them. But when they started to turn to book stops, I was like, nah, I'd rather read a Nabokov or a something.
I tell you what, you would struggle to get me to sit down and read a book that thick now.
Yeah.
But
even now,
I flew through the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely loved them. Loved them.
Well, we have to thank J.K. Rowling for reminding people to love books, which is great.
Which is incredible because, somebody gave me a book now. Actually, I got given a book the other day and I went, oh, I'd love to read this. I've got no time. I'd probably listen to it. I'd probably get the Audible.
What's the difference?
Because
it takes the same amount of time. It takes longer, actually, because an audiobook is read slower than you'd read.
Audiobooks are passive.
Yeah.
You can be getting on with anything else. When you're sitting down and reading, that's the only thing you're doing.
That's true.
I try to do about 4 things at once at all times.
Well, you have to. You're busy.
But you can't do that when you're reading. And I'm always thinking, my phone buzzes and then suddenly I'm doing an email. The world has become crazy. And I believe that may be the reason why respected writing perhaps doesn't get given the time of day anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this raises the question they brought up on Good Morning Britain as well about should Shakespeare even be taught anymore because it's too complicated. Literacy levels, are they dropping or are they? I don't know.
Well, they said that
they said that they are.
That they are, yeah.
So does that mean we have to then exclude stuff that's difficult because it's going to put people off, or should we try and? I don't know.
Maths is difficult. But we're not saying that scrap maths.
Yeah.
Physics and chemistry, biology, I
would have scrapped them.
You are that if that was debated on Good Morning Britain, there's no way on earth anyone's going to go,
we shouldn't do chemistry.
We should definitely not do chemistry anymore. I'm dyslexic. I became a doctor despite of chemistry.
Right.
It's a ridiculous argument, but we still need it. And the language, our language, the English language, is so vitally important to our education. And it might not sound the same anymore, but it is the foundation, it's the history of our language, and it is the optimum use of it. It is the most beautiful it has ever been.
I think that's right. Yeah. Which is why we fervently argue against the idea. I know, but what we're interested to know, obviously, is what do other people think? Do you think Shakespeare has any relevance? Do you think that Shakespeare should continue to be taught in schools? Should Shakespeare be performed as much as he's performed, or have we got to a saturation point?
Yeah, and I guess what I'd love to talk about now is. What are we going to do over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Because we're doing this project.
We're doing it.
So
in love of Shakespeare.
So do you reckon we should go and speak to random people on the streets?
Yeah, we should definitely do that.
Okay.
We should go and ask people, camera in face, and say, what do you think about Shakespeare?
Just shock them in the street and just say, okay.
Yeah.
You, person, bard or not?
Get out, you bard.
Get out your bard.
It's a terrible joke. I wouldn't even bother saying the start of it. It's obvious.
So what? And obviously I want to get a cross section of views.
Absolutely, yeah. Not just.
I want to find a group of young youths. Young youths. I want to find a group of youths with bikes and hooded sweatshirts, and just ask them, do you like Shakespeare?
I think I know the answer to that. I might be wrong. I'm probably wrong.
Well, there we go. So, but we are now sort of dealing with stereotypes.
Yeah.
Because I would love it if little Timmy on his BMX goes,
Shakespeare's well wicked.
I love Shakespeare.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why he'd sound like that.
Well, who knows? Let's also point out we're in Cirencester,
and nobody speaks like that.
No, which is a quite a different demographic to a wider demographic, of course.
Yeah. So maybe we should first tackle Cirencester and then branch out.
I agree.
Maybe we should go to Stratford-upon-Avon.
Oh my word! Well, the opinions on Shakespeare in Stratford would be fascinating.
That would be interesting, yeah.
Because there are people there, obviously, who are there just for the Shakespeare. There are people who only go to Stratford for Shakespeare.
So then there's the people of Stratford.
And the people of Stratford who perhaps aren't quite so excited about.
They might hate the tourism.
I'm sure they probably do. They might hate everything to do the cottage industry of it.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Find out what somebody who would have lived a couple of doors down from Bill thinks of him.
Yeah. Find a distant relative or something.
I wonder, is anyone known to be related to Shakespeare?
Not direct line.
No, but do we know that for a fact?
Yeah, because his line ended. But I mean, there are kind of other connections along the way.
Cousins.
Right,
Should we try and find a cousin of Shakespeare?
Well, perhaps if they're listening, they can get in touch.
I'm very keen to speak to a Shakespeare cousin.
Yeah.
I wonder if the talent has gone down the gene pool.
And if it has, why aren't they writing?
Maybe they are.
Maybe they are. Maybe we just don't know about them.
Simon Stevens, direct lineage from William Shakespeare.
Maybe that's it. Maybe all the famous great poets are all related somehow, connected. Like Danny Dyer's related to William the Conqueror.
That's true.
And he's a hero and king.
Has Danny Dyer ever done any Shakespeare?
Not yet.
I'd give him a part.
Oh, yeah.
Richard III.
He'd be a good Richard III.
I'm good at casting.
He'd be a good Macbeth. Is this a dagger I see before me?
That'd be pretty good.
It would.
Do you want to be in that production?
I really would love to be in that production.
You could be Macduff.
Macduff.
McDo. McDonald's.
McDonald.
That's another thing we're going to do. We're going to go to McDonald's.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've got you a costume.
Really?
Yeah.
What for?
You're an actor.
Yeah.
You know Shakespeare well.
Yeah.
I
Wellish.
thought that you'd be perfect to play Shakespeare for a few little fun skits.
Sounds like fun. Yes.
So I'll show you your costume in a minute.
All right. Fine. Good. We'll do that. So we're going to interview people. We're going to do some fun stuff.
Yep.
What else are we going to do? We're going to go on the road.
We're going to go on the road and maybe chat to people over Skype.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people. I guess what we would love to do is to reach out now and say if anyone wants to talk to us about you have any strong feelings for or against. We're really keen to talk to anyone, any viewpoints. The more you guys interact with us, the more of a cross-section of views that we're going to get.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have these conversations because I'm actually intrigued. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, same.
This is my job. I've got to put on shows. I kind of felt like maybe I was almost had to put on a Shakespeare at some point.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering...
You felt responsible to...
I felt responsible, but maybe am I wrong in thinking that? Was I deluded?
Have you talked at all about the context, the specific context of this show? Do you want to talk about the specific context, or want to leave that to the cast or Hal? Or
Yeah, well, what I think the best thing to do is we've given a brief that this production of Henry V has been a radical modernisation of Henry. The language is still honoured as it was, but we have picked it up and dropped it in the middle of Brexit Britain.
Yeah, right now.
And I want to leave it at that. I want the people who are living and breathing it to talk more about it rather than me bastardize their vision and their work. So in this series, we'll be interacting with some of the guys from the cast, and you'll be meeting them over the next few days.
Yeah. And what else do we want to do? We want to get perspectives, and I don't want people to be intimidated by the fact that we're like, yeah, hey, Shakespeare's great, yay, and somebody with a contrary view is going to say, well, there's no point in me talking to these guys because
they're fans, fanboys. I'm pretty neutral. Again, my loyalty is to my audience.
Yeah,
and if my audience don't want Shakespeare, then this will be the first and the last Shakespeare at the Barn Theatre.
Quite right. Then there's no call for it, is there?
Yeah.
That's the litmus test.
So this is the test. Yeah. Do you want it, folks? Do you want more Shakespeare? If you do, then I need to know. Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this there. We've had a good chat. We've got the ball rolling.
Yep.
I'm going to get sick of saying the words Shakespeare over the next couple of days.
William Shakespeare.
Rachel
Adadache.
So
Shakespeare does X Factor. It's what he would have done, obviously.
Do you think he'd have liked the X Factor? Do you think Shakespeare would have liked the X Factor?
No, probably not. I think he would have got a lot out of the big TV series and the big dramas. And I mean, they always say that, don't they? Is if he was alive now, what would he be doing? He'd be writing soap operas.
So many people are telling me, "Oh, if Shakespeare's alive now, he'd be a rapper."
Well, I mean, he wrote sonnets.
And in verse, rhymes.
Yeah. A rapper, I don't know. Or would he be like Elton John?
Bernie Taupin.
Taupin, yeah.
Is it Taupin?
Yeah, probably.
Would he have been a lyricist?
If no, he would have been a dramatist. I mean, he was a poet-dramatist, and he was in the theatre.
Do we have many of them anymore?
What?
Sort of people who write in such detailed verse.
Verse drama isn't a particularly popular form, but it happens, of course.
I couldn't tell you one playwright, and this maybe is again my ignorance.
Well,
one playwright.
No, I don't think anyone writes specifically in verse anymore. I think it's done as an effect. So a classic example would be Mike Bartlett did King Charles III in verse because he was making a point, making our current royal family into a Shakespearean drama.
Melodrama, yeah.
And so the characters then echoed and referenced other Shakespeare characters. If you were in the know, it was quite funny. You had kind of Lady Macbeth in there, and you had literal Prince Hal in there. You had, that was fun. There are others. I mean, there was a recent Everyman at the National when Rufus Norris took over, and his first production was Everyman, and that was a modernised verse drama based on the original.
And do you think it adds?
Well, if that's if the form and content meet, then yes. I don't think anyone would choose specifically to write in verse. There wouldn't necessarily be any call for it.
So why did they?
Why did he?
Why did many people write in verse back in the day?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, isn't it? He wrote in both. He was a poet first, I think it's fair to say. I think, and he only wrote 2 plays in their entirety in verse, from start to finish.
But they all contain.
Yeah, I think all of them contain verse. Yeah, but there's only 2 out of the 37 which are verse start to finish.
And which are those?
Richard II and King John. Yeah,
good knowledge.
Thank you. Richard II is one of my favourite plays. I love it. But it was one of the ones I studied, and of course, so that gave me insight from the get-go. Yeah, and it gave me a passion for it. But
studied when?
A level.
So you would be very much backing the horse that it should be done at all levels of schooling.
Well, yeah. I mean, okay. There's a different question, and again, at all levels of schooling is a different question. Isn't it?
Sort of secondary school then.
Well,
primary school.
I mean, primary. I couldn't even read. Yeah, no. I mean, I think the first Shakespeare we did at secondary school was Romeo and Juliet, probably when I was 13 or 14, which is about standard. And as much as I enjoyed it, and as much as I was starting to get a sense of Shakespeare at that age, it wasn't life changing for me. I was kind of like, oh, this is interesting.
It's a good story.
Yeah, of course it is, and it has a relevance to you when you're that age because Juliet's 14, and it's about the first love, and and it's violent and it's funny and it's bawdy, and there's all sorts of exciting stuff going on in it, which is it's a great first choice. Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream are 2 obvious entry points for Shakespeare. But I think if you're not into books, you're not into plays, you're not into language or words, which I was, you're going to have a hard time with it, and you might not get everything you could get out of it. It was later, having already established my love of English and of literature and of words, to do 2 Shakespeare plays at A level was it for me. That really opened me up to the power of it and the wonder of it.
So, what's your favourite speech from Shakespeare? Shakespeare's work.
I don't know. I mean, there's lots of great speeches. I think my favourite play is still Hamlet, and that's the one that the first one I saw that really amazed me. I would have been probably 15, and I saw Ian Glenn playing the part at the Bristol Old Vic, and I remember it. I remember the images of it vividly. And since then, I've kind of hunted down Hamlet. I see big ones if they're on. I want to see people playing Hamlet because it's one of those roles that's that encompasses everything, and every actor brings a different element to the character. You'll see something completely different. Whoever's playing Hamlet, it can be anybody, but nobody defines Hamlet. Hamlet is bigger than the actor. And that seems to be the thing about a lot of Shakespeare, which is I find, again, fascinating, which doesn't seem to apply in modern writing so much. Maybe it's just because of the weight of history and the weight of, all those characters, all those great actors who've played these roles. But very few actors define a role in Shakespeare. They play the role. You can't
borrow it.
Right. There's no definitive Hamlet. There's no such thing. It's not possible. There are ones that people will love and would be highly regarded and will be up there, but it's not like the stamp. There it is. There's the one.
Yeah, unlike sort of Jon Snow.
You
could only have Kit Harington playing Jon Snow.
And it's unlikely that anyone will ever play him again unless they're going to do like prequel series and whatever, and it will maybe somebody else.
Younger,
right?
But that's really interesting. When you think Henry V, you think Olivier.
Yeah.
You think Branagh.
Yeah.
I think Jude Law just did it recently with the Michael Grandish Company.
Right.
It isn't owned by them. You'd never say, there'll never be another.
No, and for most people, it's more about the first person they saw play a role, and that defines it in many ways for a lot of people. So Olivier would be right up there for most people because it was such an amazing thing that he did. And again, he only did it because it was responding specifically to something of the time and of the era. That was so smart. It wasn't like he could do any Shakespeare play, but it was like, no, this is about the Second World War and about patriotism and firing people up and,
So with that in mind, do we think that Henry V, when it's been brought back, for me, that Branagh video, the VHS, which I watched when I was doing A-level English literature, and we studied Henry V.
Henry V?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the reason we picked the play because it's the only one I know. No, that's not true.
No.
That's not true. I watched that in school, but do you I'm guessing loads of people went to watch the Laurence Olivier one in the cinema when it came out.
I think everybody. I mean, it was like it was the biggest film of the year.
Yeah.
And then it won lots of Oscars.
So at the time, that was amazing. If for Shakespeare, and they do come out, I think Coriolanus was only a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the Ralph Fiennes Coriolanus and the really, really brilliant Michael Fassbender Macbeth, which is just great. It's my favourite Macbeth on film. And actually, for me, and people disagree, obviously, people got very strong opinions one way or the other, had a very long conversation with Shakespeare buddies, if you like, about great Shakespeare films, and the opinions were completely divided. People were like, I absolutely love the Branagh Much Ado About Nothing. It's beautiful and it's funny and it's sexy, and other people like it's trashy and it's doesn't serve the play. And then I love the Fassbender Marion Cotillard Macbeth. I think it's just magnificent, and it's my favourite Macbeth and one of my favourite Shakespeare adaptations actually, because he's not always well served by film. There's been I don't know. There's a handful that I'd say are really great movies, and some are just serving the play.
But we look back to the 40s, I believe, wasn't it, when Olivier's...
Yeah, Henry V, yeah.
It was the biggest film.
Right, yeah.
Now, it would probably go straight to Netflix.
Well, I wonder. It's interesting, isn't it?
Would a Shakespeare win an Oscar now?
It could. I think it could.
You just said that Fassbender's Macbeth. Did that have any awards?
I don't know. I'd have to check. It certainly deserved them, and both of them were fantastic in it, and it looked magnificent.
I would love to find out.
Yeah,
we'll have a look at that.
Yeah.
But big question: if a Shakespeare was done with the biggest people, with the biggest budgets as you'd get, or with a creative team that's worthy of Oscars, would it win one?
Well, I mean,
or has it just all been done?
The closest you get would be Hollow Crown, because that was the best actors they could get and the biggest budgets, and doing it full on, and that's a bit like a half sort of semi update of the BBC 70s 80s where they filmed. Yeah.
So let's just come back to that, and you can redo Hollow Crown, and then we'll cut out because we're coming up to an hour.
Okay. Interesting for the long form folk. Yeah, we're going again. What was I saying about Hollow Crown?
So Hollow Crown had the biggest budgets.
The Hollow Crown had the biggest budgets and the best actors available at the time, and that felt like a bit of an update from what the BBC did in the 70s and 80s, where they filmed every single one of the plays one by one.
Yeah,
and they got the best people they could, but they did them all in studio settings, and it felt a bit stodgy, and some of the casting wasn't particularly great, and it was like some are hit and some are miss. On the whole, they're quite hard to watch. But as a study of where Shakespeare was then, it's quite fascinating. And it's like
that's not going to inspire new audiences studying where Shakespeare was then.
And I wonder.
I want to know where Shakespeare is now.
Right? Yeah. And I think I suppose that there was an element of safety in doing Hollow Crown on TV, as opposed to doing them as big, cinema movies. But then maybe they're not designed for that. I think they were riffing on the idea of the box set.
And when did they come out?
What was that? Within the last 10 years.
I've not seen them. I'm going to watch them.
Yeah. So you've got Ben Whishaw playing Richard II, and you've got Tom Hiddleston playing Henry V, and you've got Benedict Cumberbatch playing Richard III. It's, it's the...
And they're condensed... the full plays?
I think. I mean, there may be minor cuts. Most films of Shakespeare do cuts. But I think they're pretty much intact.
Okay.
So they're feature length, or more.
Great.
Yeah. And it's the whole history cycle from Richard II to Richard III.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I would be fascinated to see if a big filmmaker who loves Shakespeare put on a big film with big actors. I mean, that Macbeth is a good example.
I haven't watched that either. I'm going to watch that.
Yeah,
I'll probably watch that tonight and feedback tomorrow.
Yeah, grand. It's a great movie. I really enjoyed it. It's visually fantastic. So exciting.
Cool. Well, Dom, we're going to wrap it there.
I could keep talking all day.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
So let's check back over the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And see if anyone actually gives
a monkey's uncle.
About Shakespeare or about us, or the Barn Theatre.
So to reiterate, we want to hear from the listeners and the viewers comments on this, wherever it's going out. Where's it going to be?
So we are going to post all over social media, on our Facebook page, and the Twitter page, and our Instagram. So please get in touch on any of those platforms.
Yeah.
And let's chat. Let's discuss a bit of Shakespeare.
Talk Shakespeare.
Talking Shakespeare.
Talking.
There we go. We got a name.
Shakespeare.
Talking.
Hashtag.
Talking Shakespeare
with Ewan Lewis.
With Yui.
Louis.
Yui.
Yui.
Yui Louis.
Yui Louis
and the news.
Dommy B.
Dom. Dick and Dom.
In the house.
Oh God.
Yui and Dom in the library.